All right, I've kicked off the recording. Welcome back, everyone. Last week's conversation was really interesting and really looking forward to seeing where this one goes today. I think Nigel, before we started recording, had a really great question that we might be able to frame this conversation around today, which is, what are the characteristics of the characteristics around which a great organisation can emerge? And I might hand over to you, Nigel, to kick that off.
Yeah, what we were just briefly talking about, and I think this is one of the things I'd be really interested to hear from everybody else on, is that I talk a lot about leadership and leadership characteristics, about people displaying the behaviors and the attitudes and the actions that they wish others to follow to become great leaders. And when I talk to a lot of organizations about organizational design, about optimizing an organization for the flow of value or for whatever outcomes are important to that organization and for optimizing that flow to achieve those outcomes, the people doing the work are pretty clear on what's necessary to happen to enable an organizational design to emerge that will optimize the outcomes. But the leadership tend to be predicated to fight against any of those changes. And it's Drucker once said about any innovation in a corporation will stimulate the corporate immune system to create antibodies that destroy it. So it seems that the people we need to influence the most and the people that we need to be involved the most in helping optimize the design of an organization to achieve its outcomes are the people we're finding the hardest to change. And I think that might be an interesting discussion, because we seem to be predicated against being great leaders rather than becoming great leaders. And I'm sure that Dave and Jabe and some of the anthropologists here and others will have some great insights.
I think the framing of the question is problematic. So, so I'm into a Twitter style now. I'll stop, right? I think the problem is what we tend to do is we say, okay, leaders don't do this or they don't do that, and we therefore can't do this. Yeah. And the sort of way in which middle management in particular can stop things happening is scary. I think one of the things I learned in IBM, though, is it wasn't deliberate. There's a phrase somebody in IBM once famously said to me. They said, you shouldn't take it personally, you were just roadkill. And it was kind of like, well, I do take it personally because I'm flattered on the side of the road, but I got the point. Yeah. What you've got is, and remember, we've got to remember our basic cognitive neuroscience. People don't see what they don't expect to see. So it's not that people are deliberately stopping this sort of stuff. They're just not seeing it. All right. And because it doesn't fit the patterns of what they want to do. And there's a huge myth in leadership. So people start off with these things are wrong. And then they sort of imply if you do the opposite, it would be right. And the answer is it wouldn't, because you're not dealing with that basic thing about human attention. And that's why I've always argued what matters is, and this goes back to Deming as well, it's the processes that matter, not the individuals. So if you've got processes which make even conservative middle managers aware of people who are thinking radically differently, they will pay attention to that because it plays into human curiosity. It's not that they've been deliberately deliberately bad in not paying attention to it. Yeah. Most human beings, given a chance, will do something. There's also, I think, linked with that, and this is another institutional thing, the growth in transparency in organizations has destroyed the capacity for innovation. Because as you increase transparency, risk-taking goes down. And if you're in a middle management position or a senior leadership position, you're largely about minimizing risk. And the final thing people forget is that often, even though as a leader you know it's the right thing to do, you can't politically do it. It may well be your shareholders won't accept it. You know your shareholders are wrong. Maybe you don't have the resource, but you can't say why, because that would destroy confidence. Yeah, it may just be that in the context of everything else which is going on, this is going to get shot down in flames. As if even this is a 5% of chance wrong, it's too difficult. I mean, that was when I created something called see, attend, act. Do I see the data? Do I pay attention to the data? Will I act on the data? There are 3 separate processes, and you have to take account of that. So I think it's important to realize if you see leadership as a governing constraint, which is how it's generally seen, i.e. something which prevents things crossing barriers, then that's probably correct, but you need to make those barriers permeable rather than abolish them. And just having leaders take the opposite behavioral characteristic ain't going to make any difference. Yeah. Enabling constraints are how things interact and connect. And part of the role of leadership is to allow that. The difference is when you get a major crisis. So when something really goes disastrously wrong, and you need people to have a sense that there is some sense of direction. It doesn't have to be goal. So there's a role for leadership in terms of motivation, yeah, which actually only applies in a crisis, but doesn't apply on a day-to-day basis.
I've just written a bunch of stuff down because, I mean, it's really clear what you were saying. When we're in a crisis, then that's within Cynefin, that's when we're actually using novel practices, because people don't really care. It's just go try something and save our souls, you know, save
and the risk
problem.
is lower as well. Remember, in the crisis, the risk of innovation drops significantly. Yeah?
Yes. But the other interesting point you're bringing up, in a multi-team system, which is what we should really truly call any sort of scaled organization, whether it's Scrum or Agile or just nothing to do with Scrum or Agile, a multi-team system, but it's the interactions between the agents, the people, the systems, the machines that are more important than the agents themselves. That's one of the key learnings from team science, and that is your enabling constraints. One of the areas that I practice in, and one of the things that we talk about a lot, of course, with your lean and agile and Scrum type practitioners, is visibility. Now, you use the words transparency, and actually, interestingly, Ken Schwaber, when he first created his transparency inspection adaptability, actually called it visibility inspection adaptability. It's in the 2004 book that he wrote on Scrum, or on Scrum practices with Mike Cohn. But one of the things that I practice and I teach people is techniques to make the facts visible. It's like Ono used to say, you know, I like data, but I prefer facts, because we can manufacture data, lies, damn lies, and statistics, whereas facts are facts. But when we try to make those facts visible, and indeed when we do make them visible, and I've done this in many organizations, the large ones like Toyota included, we start to reveal the things that you mentioned, Dave, which are the things that the middle management want to suppress, which is not taking greater risk. We're actually exposing weaknesses in the system. We're exposing things that need to be addressed, but there's a huge amount of fear there to address them, or even fear to admit they exist. And then we start to hide things from the leadership, or the leadership are so detached because they're non-participatory, non-engaged because of the size of the organization. And then we've got that famous middle frozen layer here, which are massaging the message that way and suppressing the messaging that way, so that the visibility that we're creating, which enables us to identify and address things that we need to address to optimize the organizational design, are hidden. And I wonder if this is more of a nature thing than a nurture thing.
Nature deals the cards and nurture plays them. If I go back to Kierkegaard, and that's actually one of the really important phrases. Yeah, I think one of this is the kind of like the action orientation idea. So, and you remember the principles of complexity, disintermediation, distributed cognition, and granularity. Right now, the problem with most large organizations at the moment is you've got massive mediation, you've got very chunked material, you've got no distributed cognitive function. Everything flows in single channels. So if you change that, I think everything changes with it. So if you increase the empathetic contact between leaders and people doing work, or between customers, then you can actually make a radical difference. They will actually change, right? And I think that's the key principle. And I think we're being held back really badly at the moment in organizational science by the sort of, it's all about the individual, it's about individual competencies. If we just have better leaders, if we train better leaders, and it's not that any of that stuff hasn't got value, or it doesn't have in value on a one-to-one basis. I mean, I think the coaching market is fully legitimized as a method of helping people through crises, but it's based in psychology in many ways, because it's that type of coaching, is to provide individual and personal resilience. What it's never going to do is to make any substantial difference to the organization as a whole. And I think there's also massive ethical issues here. If you change how people interact, then it's ethical. If you try and change what people are, I think that's very dubious.
Because
Nigel, I had a couple comments about visibility and management. So the first thing I would kind of say is that if you look at like commons and the way that people try to manage common resources. So in other words, things that we share together at a team level, clearly one of the things that we're doing in our processes is trying to manage a set of resources, our time, our access to different things in order to maximize the value that we're producing, right? And so making those rare resources that are being consumed by a team visible to the team is important for the team to be, let's say, in control of themselves. Yeah, make sense? And the same thing happens at team of team levels, right? So like in between teams, they need to start having conversations about, hey, like how much of my time, how much your time am I consuming by, say, providing you slightly lower quality input than you would like to have? If I improved the quality of my input into your work system, how much time would you save? How much? So we're talking about making visible and clear the information that allows teams to self-organize and self-create a common set of resources and manage those things so that they're not depleted, right? And you can say, you know, one of the things like Don Reinertsen would point out, right, is that at about an 80% utilization of people's rare resources, there's a hockey stick. So managing on the edge of that hockey stick, like pushing the organization's consumption of certain resources right to 80% will maximize the amount of value that is created by the system. But if someone comes by and uses slightly more of that resource, it can cause the system to spiral out of control very quickly. So now, what if we look at it from a manager's point of view and understand something subtly different? What the difference between kind of like visibility and observability at the team level or the team of teams level? We'll call this kind of like vertical, is that right? Horizontal data. But vertical data, the data is going up and down the organization, has subtly different problems with it because there's two problems. The first one is that team of teams managers tend to aggregate their data together. So they end up using the averages of things. And if they're averaging together processes that are actually different processes, they end up observing not real output, right? The data isn't actually correlated with any particular behavior of the system. The second thing though is this. You can imagine like if you and I and everybody on the call were managing a forest and we figured out like there need to be a certain number of trees in the forest and certain relationships between the trees. And it's just basically based on like us living in the forest for hundreds of years, and some of it's tacit, some of it's explicit, but we know this is the number of kind of like trees that we need to have around, right? And we can observe this process. But our forest gets sold to a management company who comes by and says, we need you guys to continuously produce this amount of trees. And we go, all right, well, we can do that. And then they have a pinch one quarter and they say, hey, we need a couple more trees this quarter. We just give me just a couple more. Just need you to push a couple more trees this quarter. And we said to them, listen, that will create a cycle that will cause the forests to collapse. So don't do that. And they go, I don't care. It's not my problem right now. Right now, I need extra right now, right? And so the visibility of external actors who are specifically trying to optimize the system for one set of needs, the near-term profitability of a firm, versus the again horizontal visibility that allows the self-organization of the firm in order to sustainably reproduce a certain set of outputs is not always in alignment with itself, right? And noticing this thing is difficult because most organizations don't think about the fact that as you go up the stack, what people are measuring and what they value changes, right? Like CEOs care about very specific metrics that are incredibly abstract and almost have no direct correlation with any one individual's behavior in the firm, right?
And also short term.
I mean, pay attention to that. It just means they're paying attention to different things because they are at a different level of time span, and their primary interactions are with different actors in different parts of the market. So anyway.
Part of the question here is the overall constraints of the economy. So one of the reasons that organizations are bad is that you've got this focus on 3-month targets. I mean, that creates we need 2 more trees. Yeah. And even though you know it's the wrong thing to do for the long term, if you do it, you're going to lose your job. So one really good friend of mine in IBM, who was very, very senior, I mean, like, you know, one of the top 200, right, basically got fired because the information which normally he would have looked at first about his business was available in the center first. So IBM changed all their information processing. So everything was fully visible. So he gets a phone call from the CEO with, I need you to do this on these clients. And he says, well, if I do that, I'll so damage the relationship, we won't get the major renewals next year. It will be a total disaster. And he got the, well, that doesn't matter, I'm telling you to do it. And he said, I'm not doing it, but it will destroy the business. And he was fired. And actually they paid him a bloody fortune in compensation. Right? Now, that is not an uncommon story. Right? And partly there used to be buffering in systems. The transparency issues for me is a major one. Because you could hide things, because you didn't have to reveal everything, because you could control the information upwards, yeah, you could actually manage a lot, right? There was sort of buffering within the system. And this is a key principle people keep forgetting. It applies to the internet as well. If you have a system without any buffering, it will become perverse. And that's what we've done with information transparency. We've created a system which by its definition will be perverted.
Funny you mentioned buffering because Kanban, Ono talked about buffering in a just-in-time Kanban system. Just a slight tangent there, but he says without buffering it won't work. So, but a couple of the things picking up on what Jabe you was saying, what you're describing there is, I'm bringing it back to things that I understand in my context, is a prioritization issue, number one, which was the whole trees and make a couple of extra trees. And prioritization, while we talk about it endlessly in organizations, and I've worked tirelessly in organizations to introduce different schema and methods and techniques and processes and approaches to manage prioritization, and everybody nods furiously and agrees it's necessary, they fail to do it for some of the reasons that you were both just describing. The other thing is, you were talking about Reinertsen. Now, I did take Reinertsen's course, and the first day my head melted because it's all mathematics, and maths is just, well, I can see Andrew just agreeing with me with his humor, but it was absolutely hideously painful. I'm sure that Dave would have gone, but I was sort of like almost, I went straight to bed that evening. The second day was easy. It was all about agile stuff. So that was easy to understand. It's pretty basic and simple. So there was a hint there. But he talked a lot about queuing theory, and I've read a lot of books. And actually, I'm not making this up. This is sitting on my desk. It's a superb book by Reinertsen, Managing the Day. It really is almost a masterclass for people at my level, but which is the basic level. But when we talk about queuing theory, once you get above about 65% of utilization of any resource, not just people, anything, then you go from 65 to 80%, the queuing time, the waiting time doubles. And you see this on a highway. When you go from 85% doubles again to 90 doubles again. And by the time you've hit 95%, you've got a 4 times factorial, and you wonder why things go slowly. But most teams and most people that I'm seeing are running at about 130% of their agreed utilization on their employment contracts and otherwise. And we wonder why the systems are failing. I think that a lot of the trouble is there's a lot of practitioners don't understand these basic principles and need to go learn these things because they're teaching nonsense. That's number one. The other thing is that organizations, whilst you provide the information they need, then what tends to happen is that the pressures that Dave was describing countermand common sense and the facts, and other measures and other behaviors take over. And indeed, the leadership example you just gave, Dave, is that the CEO wasn't willing to listen, wasn't willing to create, there wasn't a psychologically safe environment. the individual was punished and lost his job because the CEO wouldn't listen. Yet that person was saying, you know, hey, listen, I'm giving you the facts. I'm trying to save your organization or save your business division. Which brings me to my last point, is that Professor Robin Dunbar's work on Dunbar's number, which is often misquoted by some of the agile folks out there. I see Dave's picking up on that. It's actually 147.8 or 147.6, I forget now. Rounded to
147.789, I think.
Yeah, and it's usually rounded by the wrong people to 125. Bless them. The heart's in the right place, apparently. But that brings me to that other thought: is that the whole idea of organizations are just too big to be optimized, too big to be managed effectively or led effectively, and whether or not the concept of breaking organizations down, following the sort of Gore-Tex route, the Gore-Tex case study, into smaller operating units within a larger parent is more sensible. And just an example of that, when I was still with Toyota, companies like Toyota Connected, Toyota Research Institute, and then the joint venture with Uber Autonomous Technologies Group, they were creating these small, nimble, flexible, adaptable, dare I say, agile groups where the mothership had little interference with the smaller unit, and those organizations were predominantly around the Dunbar number or smaller size. So there's a few ideas to throw into the mix there.
I think there's two things to throw in here. One is the unit of analysis is a problem. So Don is coming from a manufacturing framework. Now, part of the major problem we got with management science is it always starts in manufacturing, because manufacturing is a closed system, so it's easy to study. So all of the big movements of the last 4 decades have started in manufacturing. And therefore, you automatically define things as a process flow issue. So when people talk about prioritization of tasks, they move into a process thing in a Kanban board. Yeah. Now, the reality is a lot of task management is about creating enabling constraints so that the overall process is easier across multi-threaded strands. So the minute you make it a single strand or a single series of strands with choices, you damage the opportunity to do small things now, which makes several things downstream easier. And that's what we're talking about, anticipatory thinking. Yeah, it's also what we're now talking about in terms of architecture, in terms of scaffolding. Is what matters. If you get the scaffolding right, the energy cost of interaction is much lower. If you focus constantly on what it will be at the end point, you get into discrete manufacturing, and then Don's algorithms come into effect, right? So I think that manufacturing metaphor, which underpins things, is deeply scary, because the mathematics are wrong for a human systems with high levels of interaction, right? I think the other thing is the Dunbar sequence is the most abused thing, where he goes, 5, and then you multiply by 3, but then he goes 5, 15, 150, 15 multiplied by 3. It makes the point, right? What everybody gets wrong on that is only the 150 is an organizational unit. And that's actually the study on primate grouping behavior and the size of the neocortex. So Gore says no more than 150. So that's a really good rule, right? If you forget about people having family and friends. So startup up number 1, the unit size is probably about 75. Yeah, if you look at people's normal social span, in which people can have some awareness of what the other people are capable of. Yeah. So the way I always position it on Cynefin is, less than 5, which is, I wouldn't go with a Dunbar limit here. I went with the cognitive limit. All right. So your short-term memory is limited. Therefore, the cognitive load of handling more than 2 or 3 relationships goes through the roof. It's why we generally use 3s, but generally less than 5s. And asymmetry is important in human interaction as well. Then under 15 if it's complex, because you're talking about high levels of trust. Yeah. And the point about that is it's always going to be informal networks. It's never going to be formal systems, because trust has a low energy cost in an informal network and a high energy cost in a formal system. And so to get trust, you can't have a formal organization because you can't have the energy consumption you need. It's always going to go wrong. 150 then becomes an acquaint limited, and it is an acquaint limited, right? That's what it means. I said, it works, actually can work up to 300 or 500 in a professional group, because you're dealing with identities, not individuals. So because the different professional types have entry level, they have different identity. And therefore the identity is one of the ways that humans reduce cognitive load. So it's not a one size fits all. You can say in a professional group, I can go up to very large groups because the effective number of entities is probably 40 or 50, even though there's 800 or 900 people in the group. Whereas if I'm forming a team from scratch and I don't have any identity structures, I shouldn't have more than 50 or 60. Yeah. And this is people not reading the origins of the books. They just grab a number. Yeah. And people are particularly prone to that. And they don't take the underlying, the anthro-complexity concept, which is you start with how people make decisions. And they will make decisions by privileging their most recent experiences based on a partial data scan. Right? And you ain't going to stop that. No amount of coaching, no amount of leadership development will change the fact that's the way people make decisions. So you need to build processes which build in the right level of diversity, but also the right level of presentation. And often that presentation is patterns, because if you give people data, they'll form conclusions too fast. It's why we don't let people, we try not to let people look at stories until they want to use the stories to explain a statistical correlation. Because if they look at the stories before they do the statistics, they form conclusions based on the first 2 or 3 stories, and they don't listen to things that they need to say thereafter. Sorry, that was a long diatribe.
No, but it was really
people
good.
Keep falling back into these wrong metaphors, yeah.
But I think I mean, I can only imagine having conversations with executives about studying neocortex capabilities when designing their organizations. So, but it is really important. And the fact that the key thing I was writing down here was the informal relationships to establish trust in larger groups, because we all talk about trust. I mean, it's a big word we use all the time in organizations and in management. And of course, once you start to get those formal relationships with 500 people trying to trust each other, it's impossible. The amount of energy and the amount of effort just to maintain that is greater than the amount of effort to actually do the work you're there to do. So I think that when we start to look at building networks and these informal networks and starting to focus on the interactions between the networks, because then you're starting to create these large multi-team systems where it's these interactions between the agents that are important, and and we can put the level of trust on the interaction rather than on the actual individuals within those multi-team systems. Matthew, you were pinging a few things in the chat which were quite interesting. I don't know if you want to bring that up for the people who'll be watching this video about this sort of research that Emily Weber and has been doing about Rand Dunbar and some of the conversations you've been having.
Yeah, sure. So what's interesting is that Robin Dunbar, obviously he's been working in this space for quite a long time now in lots of different contexts with primates and with human beings in different societies and so on. But actually only recently has he started to look at a professional context inside the organization. And there was a great paper that actually was driven by Emily Weber, who's ex UK government digital services and so on, and general all-round amazing kind of software delivery expert. And she did some research on, well, kind of questionnaires and digging around on the size of communities of practice inside organizations. So that's a professional context. And she got in touch with Robin Dunbar and said, look, I've got this data. Do you want to publish a paper on it? And so he looked at this. And what was really interesting is that they found some very similar trust boundaries within this professional context as applied to communities of practice. Now, clearly, communities of practice are generally not the groups or teams in which most people work, even inside a professional context. They're deliberately kind of spanning across multiple areas, and yet still, through statistical analysis and maths that I don't really understand, they're able to identify that the previous kind of Dunbar trust boundary layers, if you like, were also present in these communities of practice. At least certain boundaries were present. Anyway, the paper's free to read online. It's called The Fractal Structure of Communities of Practice, Implications for Business Organization. For me, this is really interesting because this is like new research. It is actually data driven and seems to be the kind of research that is people are now turning to, including obviously Robin Dunbar himself. The thing that strikes me when speaking to my clients and to other people in organizations and so on is that this idea of these kind of trust boundaries and the implication for how they think about organizations is, as you said, Nigel, a bit kind of mind-boggling, because we might have a certain sets of rules and ways of working that work fine up to about 120, 150, whatever people. But then quite quickly, as we exceed that limit, something changes and we're not able to manage it in the same way. And there's plenty of people talking about this kind of effect when you're growing startups, and you know, we've got the example of W.L. Gore and so on. But this idea of kind of non-linear or sudden step changes in behavior as we exceed a certain size is completely out of the kind of mental frame for lots of people, lots of managers, and lots of people running organizations and making decisions. And that's, I think, a key part of where the problem comes from, is the rules that worked at a small scale are simply not going to continue to work as this, unfortunately, as this kind of organization becomes more successful, if you like, it gets more orders in, it hires more people. You can't expect the same shape and the same patterns to work. The concept of something that's fractal, self-similar at multiple different scales, is completely mind-blowing to lots of people. It's not something that's...
You can shoot that research down in flames when you look at the method of collection. Sorry, I've read the paper. Yeah, their sample is people who downloaded a maturity model of community as a practice. So their sample is people responsible for communities of practice who are concerned about the bureaucracy of their role in organizations. And we did enough work in IBM to say the correspondence between knowledge managers and reality is zero correspondence.
Okay, so you can go ahead and critique the paper. This is Robin Dunbar, who's the second author.
I know Robin. I've said this to Robin directly. All right. So Robin is interested in the mathematics on this, but you can't. This is the trouble.
So as I was saying, this is just an example of something of the kind of research that's happening now. This is an example of research that's starting to happen with people who are leading in this field. My point here is not to kind of hold up that paper particularly, but I find it very interesting, is that the whole concept of behavioral change inside organizations that is dependent on kind of the grouping and the size of people inside particular groups. And therefore we need to introduce different kinds of kind of behavior and intergroup communication. That's a lot, I think, where a lot of the difficulty lies. It's just that as a principle feels kind of wacky and really strange to lots of people in management positions and so on.
It's really interesting that you say that, Matthew, because I've been through, I think we were 140 at our peak as an organisation. And it's really interesting when you talk about other founders who've been through the stages of growth. The scaling points seem to be quite similar, and the stories around the scaling points seem to be quite similar. It doesn't seem like there's a number per se, but sort of at that sort of 15 size, something happens. And then somewhere between 30 and 40, something happens. And then something at around 80 something happens. And everyone has those similar stories where you needed to shift the structure and change the way that you were leading and do some things differently in order for things to run smoothly.
I'm going to throw in just a little. There's obviously a limited amount of things I can say about my previous employment, but when I was at Toyota Connected in the early days before I joined, they were just 4 or 5 people. And then they grew gradually to the sort of 50 or 60 people. And when I joined, it was probably 100 and so people. And there was a certain way of working and a certain sort of structuring to it. And it was very light management from the top and very much organic sort of inter-team relationships and interpersonnel relationships. HR was sort of a little bit less hands-on and more flexible in the roles, not just the beer in the office type thing, but sort of more of the sort of, you know, the required structure of human resources. But then as it started to grow well towards sort of heading towards 300 at the sort of, by the time I sort of decided it was time to leave, you started to see that the hierarchies had started to strengthen. They started creating a lot of new hierarchical roles where before it was really flat. Everybody was just, I don't know, a developer or whatever word you want to use. There were some pay scales on the on the HR side, but on the roles was like half a dozen roles. There were lots of different pay levels based on experience. But then what they started to do too, and this was traditional management stuff coming in, which I fought against a little bit and lost. But basically, surprise, surprise. But basically, they started to create more and more hierarchy, more and more job titles, more and more seniority. And, you know, these people reported to these people, reported to these people. And suddenly that startup feeling, that sort of very agile, sort of, you know, self-organizing team, self-organizing organization, that fluidity started to become very rigidity, and then some of the sort of higher up echelons of the hierarchy seemed to become a little bit more dogmatic and rule-based, and more inhibiting constraints were coming in versus enabling constraints. Now, that's not to criticize TC or Totally Connected. It was something I observed, and it's something we've observed in many other organizations, but it's interesting that I saw that happening in the organization as it grew. I'm not an expert on all the reasons why it happened. I observed some of what happened, and now I continuously analyze what happened and why, and how do we avoid that happening in the future.
Okay, but this is the problem, right? So, sorry, I mean, this frustrates the hell out of me, right? People take a superficial result and they don't look at the basis of the data in, right? So one of the big problems we've got in medicine at the moment, I was talking about this at the weekend, right? And Lancet are getting caned on this, is what matters is correlation, not physiology. So if you can get a correlation, people think, right, that's it. I've got definitive knowledge. Right? If you don't understand the physiology of what's actually happening to the body, no correlation has any impact whatsoever. You have to have both together, right? It's undoubtedly true, and I think, you know, Dunbar was validated by anthropology on this, but it was the only Dunbar number which was validated, was the average size of a hunter-gatherer tribe, and that links in with the cognitive development function. So there is a limit on number of acquaints, right? But that's also based on physical interaction as well as mental interaction. And people forget that. You know, this is the post-Cartesian ideas of consciousness. It's not. Yeah, one of the reasons the hunter-gatherer tribe works is people have evolved into roles in that. There may be 150, but there's, you know, several thousand years of evolution in the roles that they're occupying within that group, which make the 150 work anyway, right? And the danger with the correlation thing is communities of practice on general last as a phenomenon in organizations for about 5 or 6 years before they collapse, because they're a cross-horizontal thing. So you can't go from communities of practice where you're only talking with the people who are organizationally responsible for implementing them, therefore they have to be a success, and draw conclusions about team size. You just can't do it, right? And the trouble is, people take papers, and I've read the paper qualifies, right? The paper is okay, but people are seizing on these things because they're looking for simplistic recipes. And they're not prepared to do the medical equivalent. They're looking at what's the physiology, what is the reasons for this? Because if I understand why there's this correlation, building practices based on it is plain bloody stupid. If you don't know why, you can't scale the what. I mean, I've been saying that for years, right? And, you know, the correlation, and it's the same with management consultant now. It's go and study 50 companies, get 200 questionnaires, do a correlation, write a report, claim a recipe. I mean, the whole world is collapsing into trivial research and trivialization of consequences. And actually, human beings making decisions based on experience would actually be a damn sight more accurate than anybody following any of those crap levels of interpretation.
You know, it's funny you should say that, Dave, because, you know, I've been doing my trivial research in the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks to the great amusement of a lot of, well, not just the people here, but a lot of people out in the world. I put a simple Scrum quiz up, 30 questions, and asked some basic stuff, and some of the responses I've got have been pretty much like, I obviously don't know what I'm doing asking these questions in this way because we're all experts and we're getting them wrong, therefore the questioners are stupid, which is quite funny. But what it is demonstrating is there's a lot of well, there's not a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of people out there with a little knowledge, when they used to say a little knowledge is dangerous, you know. And that's what's happening, is people read, you know, they take a book like this and they read 2 pages and now they're an expert, rather than read this and 50 other books and then start to synthesize the knowledge that's coming through and find the patterns. And then what starts to happen is that they then go and take a certification, and they go tell the organization we're an expert. And with the best, deepest respect in the world to the communities that I inhabit, in the Agile and the Scrum and the Lean worlds, there are a lot of people out there advising organizations on organizational design, team dynamics, and goodness knows whatever else, who are absolutely clueless about what they're talking about. They don't have the basic fundamental knowledge. And even I, after doing this for years, I'm spending inordinate amounts of hours studying and learning from not just people like Dave, who clearly is a lot cleverer than I am, but people like, you know, Professor John Turner, who I work with on this thing behind me, who's a team science and complexity thinking expert, and is a real professor with a real degree in all this sort of stuff, and still trying to understand how to solve this. So I think that a lot of what we're creating out there is creating part of the problem. I think there's all the things we've been discussing about the way organizations are currently designed, and the old sort of management techniques, and the go-to response when we get larger, create more managers and create more structure and more hierarchy, more rules, which is proven to be wrong consistently. But then unfortunately, the people advising them lack the basic understanding and skills to be able to advise them anything differently. And a lot of these coaches, of course, are in either consulting mode, so anything we say is nonsense anyway, or dismissed as such, or if they're in an organization, those consulting roles are not really seen as senior roles, they're seen as more team level junior roles, so they don't have the impact and effect on that leadership. And indeed, I've tried to fight these battles and lost, because I've challenged the traditional view at senior executive level and said, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong, and let me show you why you're wrong. And then they've either fired me or ignored me, and I've left. One of those are the criteria.
And what you've got is this constant variations of the Spotify. Yeah. So basically, this is what Spotify did when they were studied by somebody in Harvard Business Review. Therefore, we got a recipe. Yeah, this is what somebody discovered about hunter-gatherer tribes, therefore it must be true. And forget about the history. Yeah, the evolution which gave rise to that. If you're designing a system, you start with, you have to start at a journey point and allow something to evolve. And part of the danger is the complete destruction of experience-based leadership in organizations. Yeah, that's another process-based problem. Leaders being parachuted in. You know, you do an MBA, followed by a BA. Well, the other way around. BA followed by an MBA, followed by working for a big consultancy for 10 years. Next thing you know, you're running a company, but you've got no practical experience, no knowledge, no ability to do insight. And there's a good example here. If you look at the British and the American Health Service, yeah, one of the things the American Health Service is better at than the British is hospital management. Because nobody manages a hospital unless they're a doctor. So you go into an American hospital and you've got a doctor is responsibility. They're the CEO. They can't imagine anybody who wasn't medically qualified occupying that. You go into a British hospital, you've got a manager in a suit surrounded by people who are good at manipulating spreadsheets, because they've got no understanding of the field that they're managing. Right? And that's the problem in large organizations. You're getting this professional managerial class who only understand how to manage through spreadsheets. So they increasingly get disconnected. They think spreadsheets are reality. So they just want this number up in this box this month. Why can't you do it? What's the issue? Yeah? In terms of the way it works.
What you just said, and I cannot reveal who, but that what you just said is exactly what I've seen in my recent past, that the bean counters and the spreadsheet jockeys are the people now demanding and making decisions and have been placed in these very senior positions of authority, and they have no experiential learning from actually the work that they're supposed to be managing. So they're clueless about how work gets done. It's that whole work as imagined versus work as done. Yeah. And when you make that visible to them, they get very scared or they just push back. The system just fights back and says, no, you don't understand, Nigel, you don't understand, whoever, go away. We know what we're doing. Listen, we haven't got a lot of time left, and Andrew,
Yeah.
I know you're the compere, but I'm looking at Sonja and Jabe. Jabe's been remarkably quiet during this whole session this time, and
Doesn't often happen.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Nigel, on the offline chat that we had on Twitter, Sonia, you said there is the more interesting latest thinking on leadership is that it's an emergent process that co-evolves with followership, not a capability. I would love you to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I've been sitting here listening to the conversation and also just thinking about if I really want to stick my head into that hornet's nest. But I think we are, sometimes some of these wonderful things that we talk about and these processes, and they're all very rational, but human beings tend to not be. I think that sometimes we forget that we're dealing with human beings and they've got emotions and they're slightly irrational and there are all kinds of unconscious processes going on, and I think part of this coevolution, it's interesting. So one of the complexity principles is to also meet the system where it is, and Dave has been talking a little bit about, knowing the history. And I think some of the organizations that I consult in and that I work with they've almost co-evolved very dysfunctional leadership, followership, power dynamics over years. And that is, when we enter with our theories and, when we start to try and shift how people interact and all of these wonderful things that we've been talking about, we kind of run into some of these deep dysfunctions. I think in many of the organizations where some of the, especially with the disruption that leaders are facing and the anxiety that comes with it. Nigel, you've spoken, for example, about issues around prioritization. I see that a lot, and a lot of it goes down to nobody actually wanting to own the difficult decision. And so the guys at the top won't make the hard decisions, and then all of that kind of gets pushed down into the organizations, and the poor middle managers are, they find themselves kind of really being stuck in between, a lack of prioritization from the top and people from below saying, well, what must we do? So I think I just wanted to raise some of that, because I think we can't ignore the psychology and the kind of unconscious processes that's also playing out whenever we enter these organizations. But I think that research that I was referring to, and I'm sure there's many out there, but in particular the work of Professor Mary Ulbeen. She's done some really interesting work around how leadership does not rest within, or she differentiates between a leader or an individual, and leading and leadership. And, one of the things that I find really interesting is I don't know that we understand almost that reciprocal process of leading and following. And I think it's really important if we want to start moving towards collective leadership and, some of what Dave talks about, for example, in, operating in crews. How does it work for somebody who, for an individual or a role to take up leadership, but then at some stage to defer as well, so that influencing versus the deferring interplay. I think we don't really understand that well enough. And I find it really interesting just to consider that leadership is an emergent property and it is co-created. It does not rest in an individual. But at the same time, I don't think we can remove the individual from the equation, because all of these psychodynamics that start playing out. I mean, we've got narcissists in organizations. We can't just ignore that. So we can't take the individual out. So I think that boundary between the individual, the collective, the role, the identity, I think that is a really interesting thing that we need to explore, and important as well.
So, when I worked with that in the past as a executive, one of the things that I've found useful to point out to people is that executives end up playing three separate roles, And when they're not clear about which role they're currently occupying, they can confuse the people that they're working with. So an executive can either be an agent of the business, in which case they're enforcing legal structures like you can't park in the fire lane, in which case, as an executive, I'm not here to like have a conversation with you. You got to move your car. It's in the fire lane. Go move it now. You could also be a facilitator. I am aware of a set of processes or things that I believe will lead to a good outcome. I'm not here to influence the content of this conversation. I'm here to make sure that a certain process is followed. So that might be what I'm doing. And then finally, I'm here in a position of leadership. I'm here to gain your confidence and convince you that we should move in a particular direction based on my experience, etc. And if you kind of confuse those three, or if you get confused about which role you're playing, you can cause really bad outcomes, right? So like someone who's trying to lead, that sounds like they're trying to enforce a legal code. People are like confused, right? Someone who's trying to facilitate, who suddenly steps out of the facilitation role and starts talking about what should happen and what the content of what is being facilitated also could be confusing. Are you playing an objective role right now, or are you playing an active role? So like keeping these three kind of weirdly entangled activities that executives do separated in your mind as an executive, or probably even better to my mind, to try to be really explicit about it when you're switching from role to role as you're getting used to working with the team, can be really useful. I used to literally
you have to question whether leaders actually have agency. And this is a common mistake, all right? The reality is one of the reasons we got narcissists is the system requires a narcissist to control it. I mean, the way we set up the economic structure around organizations over the past 30 or 40 years, from business process re-engineering onwards, is that narcissism is the reward pattern, yeah? Because of that sort of short-term necessary focus. So I think come back to the nature-nurture thing, all right? The point is both are influential, right? So, you know, and I'll repeat it, nature deals the card, nurture plays them, yeah? The trouble is we've now got a 3-generational pattern of organizational development and organizational design, which makes all the wrong assumptions about the role of the leader. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I'm writing a book chapter for Mary at the moment, all right? So there's interesting commonality and differences, right? But what I find fascinating is most American academics cannot break away from social atomism. Ultimately, they always come back to the individual. So when you introduce concepts of identity or role or interaction, they just don't get it. They like the idea, and then next minute they're talking about individuals again. Right? And I think that's another entrained cultural pattern.
Yep. I think it's really interesting to reflect on, and I tried to be careful the way I said this, on what Sonja said about leadership. One of the ways that I've read about it in the past is that leadership is a social construct to allow people to take action, right? So in other words, we construct a leader in order to find the confidence to take group actions. That doesn't mean the leader has any particular innate abilities. It means that we construct the leader in order to do something. That it's something that we, as a social group, in order to make decisions. Whether that's, I don't know the source of that as far as whether that's a psychological or sociological effect, but I do think it's a way of inverting the idea of leadership and saying that leaders themselves are not the cause of followers. Followers are the cause of leaders. And that's
It's also worth remembering that currently every attempt to reproduce famous psychological experiments is failing. So nobody's managed to replicate any of the experimental results. Right? So all of those conclusions fall by abeyance. And you know, so that's why we've always said you can only base an opinion on physics does theory and then experimentally validates it, right? Which is kind of like, I think, where we are with management science. You can have a theory based on what you know about human cognition, about systems, and then you can experimentally validate it. What you can't do, and I think this is an a priori problem, you can't derive practice from empirical observation which will scale. Right? Now that is a fundamental problem because 98% of management practice does exactly that. And even though it's consistently failed for decades, people carry on down that route because it gives security. But a priori, I think it's not possible within a human complex adaptive system to derive scalable theory from observational empirical evidence.
Wow. Andrew, I was going to say, you know, if we do a third, we should definitely do a third session. But the topic that Sonja brought up of emergent leadership, or leadership as an emergent property, or the words that she used, and what Jabe was saying about followers create leaders. And we've always said that you become a leader because people choose to follow you, is what I've always said. I think that would be a great way to take this, extend this, because companies put people in a position of power and called them a leader, you know, the senior leadership team, the SLT. But the followers didn't create those leaders. Somebody assigned them the position of leader. Yeah. So I think this whole concept of emergent leader, Dave's losing it now, but I think this.
No, I'm not agreeing with you. It's a British and American political problem. I keep saying to people, you get the politicians you deserve. Don't blame the bloody politicians. Yeah, they're the sort of people you're prepared to vote for. So kind of like it's your bloody problem, not theirs. Yeah.
Andrew, bring us home.
Yeah, well, that was another great conversation, and yes, we'll do another one of these because it's, if nothing else, it's really enjoyable. So thanks everyone. I'll try and facilitate a little bit more next time so we can get a few more voices in. But yeah, that was really cool, and looking forward to catching up again soon. I'll share the recording again like last time, and yeah, speak soon, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Bye,
Andrew.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.